Hi, welcome to the Federal. I'm Harish Upadhyaya. Karnataka government has decided to monetize the citizen data. The government says this is an attempt to ensure that there's better service delivery. But the Karnataka open data policy, which governs on how the government will go ahead and sell citizens' data, has several aspects. Some of them are perhaps problematic. The government says that no personal data of citizens will be given to any private firm or government entity. They are saying even the data that's given out to private entities will be anonymized, which means your name, your religion, your address, all these will not be given to any private entity. But the fact that the policy itself gives very little detail and is vague on several aspects has raised several questions on whether this will actually end up kind of giving very valuable data to private firms which can be weaponized or used for commercial gains. Well, to put this whole issue in perspective, we have Soujanya Sridharan, who's a research analyst at Aapti Institute, Bangalore. She deals with everything related to tech, policy, governance. Aapti is a research institute based out of the city here and has been continuously engaging on several of these policy issues. Welcome, Soujanya.
Thank you.
Soujanya, you've seen the data policy that's been published by the government. How would you look at it? Prima facie, whatever is out in public domain and whatever we've gone through in this particular draft?
So this policy is exciting and scary for many reasons. It has three purported overarching aims, which is to one, make streamline data management and make government data available for sharing across departments, and also make a small subset of anonymized data available for selling to third parties that this policy identifies as research institutions, as private organizations, as any body corporate which has been registered in Karnataka for 24 months. This is to jump into the meat of the matter. This is disconcerting, mostly because if you look at the specific portions on data governance, and particularly the portion of the policy on data monetization, it says, this data can be sold in anonymous form only, and to organizations that the governments will authorize, and on a price that is not transparent or known to us. This is because they want to make these cover these sharing agreements under MOUs between these organizations, between a government department that owns the data on one side and between an authorized third party who's buying this data. And the specific terms and conditions are going to be covered by a non-disclosure agreement. And the problem with non-disclosure agreements is that they're not going to be subject to RTI requests, right? So as citizens, you and me won't know, even if our data is anonymized and it's being sold to a third party, who is this third party? What price is it being sold for? And the government might say we are selling it for a specific purpose, but what is this purpose, right? And all of this in so many levels is dissonant across policies. The Karnataka open data policy goes against some of what is being said in the PDP, the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019, but also the Non-Personal Data Governance Framework of 2020, and also at a more ethical level, right? And when you look at data and data governance from a human rights perspective, we as citizens should have the right to know how our data is being used and by whom and for what purposes, right? And this policy on so many levels fails to answer these critical questions.
True. But one assurance that probably this policy is trying to give out is that no personal data will be given. It will be anonymized, which means that your name won't be there, your address won't be given to anyone. But is there a risk of companies still managing to get some bit of your personal data? Is it foolproof mechanism?
Again, no anonymization technique, at least the industry standards that are being followed even today. It's called something called k-anonymity, is not foolproof. There were researchers in Imperial College London who were able to prove that with just 3 data points, not your name, nothing, just zip code, gender, and date of birth. And when you combine it with any other publicly available data set, for example, you combine it with publicly available vehicular data set, right? And you run codes on gender, zip code, and date of birth, they were able to pinpoint people up to 95% accuracy. And MIT, which is based in the US, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, conducted another research that said at any given point, 15 different publicly available data sets, which is derived from, say, the US Census document, can again help narrow down people up to 99% accuracy. And these are data that are already in the public domain, right, which is being published by government departments. So in so many ways, this is a critique of the failure of current mechanisms of anonymization itself. K-anonymity was developed in the 90s. We're in the 21st century, in the 2021, where machine learning and AI-driven technologies make it so much easier to develop algorithms that can re-identify you. There is no 100% guarantee against re-identification. And in the eventuality that you have been re-identified, there is harms to your privacy. And in the current frame of things, we have only the sensitive data rules notified in 2011 to protect us, which is not doing much. And as everyday citizens, do you believe we have the time or space to mount seriously expensive and time-consuming legal battles? Right?
Yes.
All these are important considerations which go unaddressed in this policy.
Yes. In fact, you mentioned about what happens if perhaps your data gets leaked. That's the other question many want to know. The PDP bill is still a bill. We still don't have it being passed by the parliament and becoming a law. So do we have enough mechanism to address perhaps if there's a leak, if there's a misuse, any of it right now in the existing system? Did the Karnataka government jump guns in bringing this before the PDP bill became act?
Yes and no, we do have existing mechanisms, the sensitive data rules 2011, which says, you have to notify principals, that is you and me, when there is a data breach. But do you remember the very famous MobiQuick data breach that happened just last year? And nobody was notified about the data breach. And all our personal data, very sensitive financial information, was out on the dark web for people to buy, people to use, people to hack. Those are just examples. And elsewhere in the UK, there have been protests, for instance, where recently the GP data, that is general physician data, was going to be made available for research. But the policy, NHS policy, didn't clarify who are these researchers, who are these third-party companies who can get access. And it's now been blocked, and now you have an option to opt out of this sharing, all of which is supposed to be anonymized data. But the current Karnataka state open data policy doesn't give us any such option, right, to opt out. And clearly, compliance is not happening, as you see the MobiQuick example. So the question is, there is absolutely no protection. And until the PDP bill comes, Karnataka government is definitely jumping the gun in contemplating something like this.
Well, other perhaps kind of a justification given by the state government or the bureaucracy largely is that we are not the first state. We already have states which have brought in similar law to monetize public data. And we've ensured that we've modeled our particular policy framework on it, and we are not the first ones to do it. We know 4 other states have done it. If you compare, how would Karnataka's policy stand? Second, in terms of how it's helped those governments, would you have more on whether it's actually helped or there are problematic issues there?
Okay, so let's put it this way. There is very little available on the internet when you go actually look up these policies, and and all policies should go through a phase of monitoring and evaluation. And all these policies are like less than, the oldest one is 5 years old from Orissa. And that is still too far short a time span to be doing detailed research on whether it's worked or not, right? So it's too early, like the data policy ecosystem is evolving. But to answer your question more pointedly, not all of these policies, whether it's from Orissa, Telangana, Punjab and Sikkim, like Punjab and Telangana don't have data monetization in their policy. It's only Odisha which calls for data monetization. And even then, it's restricted to a specific category of data that they call regulated access or something to that effect, right? And it's very different from how the Karnataka open data monetization policy says. From our understanding, effectively all anonymized government departmental data is available for selling. While in Orissa, it has to be notified by the government which categories of data is being sold. And delving further into the data monetization aspect of the Odisha state data policy, each department has to notify the price of these data sets. How this pricing is arrived at is not explained. There is no formula for calculation in any of this policy. There is no gazette notification, nothing. So it's like, again, a blind spot, right? How the pricing is determined is up to the government. And whether this truly reflects the social value of data is another debate.
In fact, one thing I noticed while going through this is that it says anything that's not affecting the security of the state or perhaps the whole nation is something that could be part of this data, which means that none of our data will be considered as important to the security of this country. The other aspect that comes to my mind is that so much of data is collected from us. As a citizen, my immediate question would be, is it a violation of my rights, right? When my data is collected, I haven't been informed that this could be monetized right now or some point in the future, or my consent wasn't taken for this, for sharing with anyone else. Would this be a violation of citizens' rights?
Again, if you go back to the PDP bill as the primary point of reference, because at the end of the day, that will be the governing law of the land, that will be the primary data protection legislation. The PDP bill provides for processing for personal data on two grounds. One, after getting data principals' consent, and two, it gives you grounds in which data can be processed without getting the data principal's consent. The most common way you see it is, like say you and I are employed in a particular organization, and as a part of our employment contract, we share our bank details, we share our PAN details, and so on. And there, that is still sensitive financial information that is being processed for the purpose of guaranteeing and providing employment. There, we still have a reasonable understanding of how our data is being used, because at the end of the day, you and I are getting salary on the basis of that.
And I'm directly aware of it.
Exactly, you're directly aware of it. And so that is one ground in which your data is being processed, not necessarily taking your direct consent, but you're still informed about how your data is used. But there are other ways in which the PDP bill makes exemptions for processing personal data. For instance, it says for service delivery to citizens, we can process personal data. In cases of health emergencies, we can process personal data, or for that matter, we can process personal data of citizens in the interest of the public. But what does service delivery mean? What specific services are you going to deliver to us? Are these services going to be free of cost? Do we assume because the government is delivering it, it's going to be feeding into public health or public education concerns? Not clear. What is public interest? Not clear. So in so many ways, the lack of clarity on what constitutes public interest itself could be open to misuse. I'm not necessarily saying this is what could happen here, but trying to make data sharing and processing purpose driven is an important lesson we've learned from data protection legislations from around the world, whether it's GDPR, whether it is HIPAA, which is in the US, and so on. And coming back to the PDP, there is again another important feature, which is the data minimization policy, right? We will only collect data that is necessary to serve a specific purpose.
Yes.
And when your data is being used for purposes other than which it was collected, you are required to be notified,
Yes.
right? But are you going to be notified as a citizen, or maybe you're not going to be notified because, well, I'm doing it for public interest? All of that are blank spots. I reiterate, we need a lot more public discussion. We need the Karnataka state data policy to be placed in the public domain for longer. Invite civil society experts, invite technologists, not just members of the government, and to consult on this.
Well, that's clearly there. If you look at the kind of mechanism that's been put in right now, it's largely the top bureaucracy that's part of all these three committees which are supposed to govern this and implement this. Uh, as a common man, one question that someone would have is, should I be really so worried? Because so much of my personal data is put out by other agencies, right? Your electoral roll has my name, my age, my sex, my address, my photo, all of it. A large part of your the PDS data also has some bit of these similar kind of data out there. So should I be really worried about this?
Yes, mostly because a lot of the data that is being processed in the name of your electoral rolls, or for that matter, more granular data sets that is created as a part of the National Family Health Survey or NFHS or the census exercise that happens every 10 years, there are governing legislations, there are policy frameworks, there are confidentiality clauses that prevent your data from being used for purposes other than which it was collected. So in census documents can be anonymized, insights can be shared saying in this area, this is the religious composition, this is the gender composition, this is the composition of literate and illiterate people. This is being used to inform policy making, inform evidence-based decisions. And these are still purposes and provisions that are covered by law, right? But here, the Karnataka open data policy, on the other hand, state data policy, on the other hand, doesn't mention the purposes for which your data is going to be sold.
Yes.
There is no assurance that any of these purposes are going to feed back to the community. If particularly when this is the terms and conditions of sharing and selling is covered by non-disclosure agreements. So yes, you have to be worried, I would say, as citizens, because you have no visibility into the selling process.
Which brings me to the next question, Soujanya, is that two major issues is one, how this will be governed. Second, what happens to my data. Third is perhaps, will this now give undue advantage to corporates? Will they kind of weaponize this data, use it for their benefit? When I say it's not just benefit vis-a-vis other competitors, but also kind of going ahead and commercializing services that ideally should have been given by the government. Is there a risk of that you're looking here?
Absolutely. And I think in so many ways, this goes back to the question of how do you monetize data itself, right? How do you assign a true value, a true price to data? And if you look at the economic, underpinnings of what data is, it is what we call in economics a non-rivalrous resource, right? My using a particular data doesn't prevent a third party or someone else who has access to the data from using it. And and my data is valuable, yes, but my data in combination with my neighbor's data, with a data of a community, is a lot more valuable. For example, you take BP metrics, right? I know mine is say 90. But I will not be able to understand if it's high or low or normal unless I combine it with average aggregate BP metrics, saying this is what is high or low. The same way, governments, one data set on education might not be, anonymized data set on education might not be as valuable as, say, a combined data set on income levels in the same area. And between a combination of these two, like, re-identification is a risk, yes, but also, oh yes, this is low literacy. This is also like middle income areas. So usually middle class that is maybe very interested in investing in like private education. So let's sell it to enterprises that might want to prop up private institutions. And what is essentially should be informing public policy and public education eventually becomes a narrow, funnel to push for privatization of essential services, perhaps. And another thing, if you how you're pricing the policy is how you're pricing the data is a problem, because we don't understand how an individual data or community's data is valuable in itself, and in combination with the others, data which is valuable today can be X amount, but in the future it could have a lot more value, right? And it's infinite, so to speak. And if you price it too low, everybody could maybe afford it. But on the other hand, if you price it high enough, or if you don't have a transparent pricing mechanisms, only such that certain corporations can afford it, you risk propping up private data monopolies. You put a lot of data, valuable social data, in the hands of a few corporate entities who might seek to reap the benefit, while the larger society ends up paying for services. The larger society, which is the source of the data itself, right? You and me and the people around us who produce this data have no understanding of like the monetary transaction that took place. The value is not being brought to us if we end up paying for services. And so all of these are big problems, and we don't have laws to handle private data monopolies. Conventional anti-monopoly, antitrust, competition laws have been failing. You see investigations in the USA about this against big tech. Uh, is India equipped to deal with this? It's a question we have to ask.
Absolutely. Data is called the new gold. And in Bangalore, you have hundreds of companies perhaps mining this new gold. So perhaps it's really essential that a data policy that is emerging out of Bangalore for the whole of Karnataka needs a little bit of more wider consultation. Soujanya, thanks a lot for joining us and putting things in perspective.
Thank you so much, Harish. It was great speaking with the Federal.
Thank you. Do tune into thefederal.com for more stories, analysis, and opinion pieces. Thank you.